Hello, Neural here, and today we're going to go into some detail talking about battery chemistry selection in your energy storage system. I'll be focusing on stationary renewable energy applications, the type used in off-grid solar, but this will also apply to RVs and other applications where someone is considering which battery type to purchase for their energy storage needs. There are a lot of claims made about lithium batteries, but which hold up to scrutiny and which don't? You might be surprised. Selecting batteries for your energy storage application can be daunting as it provides the backbone of your energy system, and it's one of the largest costs of a typical off-grid system, usually exceeding that of solar panels over the lifetime of the system. Today we're going to look at the three most popular options, talk about how they compare both in terms of raw numbers and practical application, mock up on paper a hypothetical energy storage system using each of these three options for comparison, and dispel some common myths and misconceptions along the way. As spoiler, there are a lot of marketing claims made in the battery space that are simply untrue or intentionally misleading. For example, if you stay away from lead acid for environmental reasons, you probably shouldn't. More on that later. While many different chemistries exist, I'm only going to focus on three: flooded lead acid AGM, and lithium iron phosphate, which from now on I'll simply refer to as lithium. Most people know that there are different lithium ion chemistries available, with new ones being developed every year, but even in the lead acid space there are numerous chemistries and constructions available. Absorbed glass matte, which has a fiberglass mesh placed in between all the plates. This captures the electrolyte and helps with things like freeze resistance, recombination of the electrolytes, you get less water loss, fast charge and discharge, etc. There are gel batteries, which is essentially a flooded battery with a gelling additive added to the electrolyte. This helps with acid stratification and some other things. It's not very commonly used anymore, so I won't cover that. Flooded valve-regulated lead acid hybrid batteries, which is essentially a flooded battery with its construction where the vents are sealed, so you can't service them, and they're specially designed so that they use less water and retain that water longer. And then there are traditional flooded batteries. Those are the primary constructions, and within each of those there is other chemistries. There's lead antimony, which is usually lead antimony selenium today. They alloy in some antimony into the plates, lead plates, so that they are stronger, they're not as fragile, more vibration resistant, etc. In almost every automobile in North America, those are lead calcium. Those aren't as durable, not as long lasting, but they use much, much less water. And people don't want to service their car batteries, so you want to put a battery in your car that lasts maybe 5 years before the water evaporates. That's what they use because it extends the water life. And then there are pure lead with additional differences in positive and negative plate construction and chemistry. But to keep this more condensed, we're just going to choose one battery of each type and use those for comparison. So which type of each battery should we choose for this comparison? Many times people compare lithium batteries to inexpensive Walmart-style batteries to show how much better they are, which is both meaningless and nonsensical. I am not doing that here. Instead, I am choosing high-quality batteries from reputable manufacturers of the type that is appropriate for an off-grid storage application. While there's many choices out there and the ones I choose are not necessarily the best for your application, I would be proud to have any of these three options in my own personal battery bank. This video is not sponsored, and these are merely my personal selections. For flooded lead acid, I chose the Trojan Battery Company Solar SIND 06610. It is an industrial 6-volt battery designed for demanding long-life applications. This is typically your high-end forklift battery. It comes in a hybrid polypropylene inner container and polyethylene outer container for durability. It is 24 inches tall and weighs 220 pounds. Including the cost of shipping a pallet of batteries for a battery bank, they cost about $600 per battery delivered to your door. For lead acid AGM, I chose the Enersys Northstar battery NSB100FT, with FT standing for front terminal. This is a variant of that battery, not the blue series. This is the orange series, like for telecom backup. This is an industrial 12-volt battery designed for demanding long-life applications and partial state of charge conditions. This is an upgraded version of the battery you'll often see in telecom backup. It comes in a unique PPO plastic case for durability, is 11.3 inches tall, and weighs 74 pounds. Again, with the cost of shipping a pallet, they're about $320 per battery. For lithium, I wanted to choose the Trojan Trillium battery because it is a high quality battery from a major manufacturer, but instead I settled on Battleborn BB112, BB10012. Since this is a more common battery among enthusiasts, RVers, and off-grid communities. Battleborn is a smaller company, but it has a good reputation and they do make good batteries. It also costs substantially less than the Trojan competitor. The charge and discharge limits are a little bit more restrictive, but that shouldn't be an issue for most applications. And being a smaller battery company, Battleborn doesn't appear to use a distributor model, so you don't get pallet shipping discounts, but they are $950 each with free shipping, no matter how many you buy. Now, before we get into comparing details of these batteries, let's start a checklist of common claims that lithium battery makers make, and let's see how many of them hold up through a detailed comparison. Because I chose Battleborn, I'm going to test their list of marketing claims taken directly from their sales literature. Again, these are quality batteries from a good manufacturer, but this is coming from their marketing department. So, number 1, at least double the power in the same physical space of lead acid. Claim number 2, can be discharged 100% versus lead acid recommended 50% depth of discharge. Number 3, can be installed indoors with no hydrogen gases generated, also no terminal corrosion. Number 4, about 1/5 the weight of lead acid, resulting in significant weight reduction. Number 5, output voltage is flat during most of the discharge cycle, increasing efficiency of your system. Number 6, can be charged up to 5 times faster than lead acid. Number 7, lasts 10 times longer than lead acid. And number 8, holds a charge for up to 1 year without the need for a trickle charger. Those are some pretty incredible claims. So before watching the rest of this video, in the comments below, tell me which ones you think are marketing fluff and which ones are real benefits. And later on we'll talk about additional benefits of lithium versus lead acid, as well as drawbacks that Battleborn obviously isn't inclined to mention. So with that, let's jump into our comparison table. I'm going to be using empirical units rather than metric because they're the units that most people who watch my videos use, and it doesn't really matter what units I use anyway since they're just relative numbers. But it does offend some unit snobs, so that's a plus. For our flooded battery, we have the Trojan SIND06610. It's a $600 battery. It's a 6-volt battery. It has 610 amp hours, weighs 220 pounds. For the lead acid AGM battery, we have the Northstar Blue Plus Series NSB 100FT, $320 each. They are 12-volt batteries. They are 100 amp hours, and they weigh 74 pounds. And then on the lithium side, we have Battleborn. This is a $950 battery, also 12 volts, also 100 amp hours, and it weighs 30 pounds. In terms of battery size, we are going to go by battery volume. Floor space in a building or compartment space in a vehicle is usually what matters, but to keep things generic, we're just going to go with simple volume. The Trojan flooded battery is 15.33 inches by 10.22 by 24.01 tall, for a total volume of 2.18 cubic feet. The Northstar AGM battery is 15.6 inches by 4.2 by 11.3 inches tall, for a total volume of 0.43 cubic feet. The Battleborn battery is 12.75 by 6.875 by 9 inches tall, for a volume of 0.46 cubic feet. With those specs out of the way, let's start with some qualitative metrics. First, the specific energy, or kilowatt hours per pound, to keep the numbers easy to compare. So for the flooded lead acid battery, we have 60 pounds per kilowatt hour. Here a smaller number is better. In the AGM battery, we have 62 pounds per kilowatt hour. And in the lithium battery, we have 25 pounds per kilowatt hour. Much better than the lead acid batteries. Here we can see that both lead acid technologies are similar and that lithium is about 2.5 times as energy dense. Next, energy density, or in this case, cubic feet per kilowatt hour. The flooded Trojan battery is 0.6 cubic feet per kilowatt hour. The Northstar AGM battery is 0.36 cubic feet per kilowatt hour. And the Battleborn lithium battery is 0.38 cubic feet per kilowatt hour. Note that while lithium batteries weigh less than lead acid, they actually don't take up that much less space. This is due to their less dense materials and the cylindrical cell nature, which waste a lot of space. The industrial flooded battery has to be stored upright, and it needs extra room for service, outgassing, terminal cleaning, etc. So there's more to it than just the volume number. But it's an interesting thing to note. The AGM battery does not outgas during normal operation, and on this battery it has a vent here that you can attach tubing to, so you can vent it outside very easily, outside your battery compartment. This is often done in vehicles when you have a battery beneath the back seat. They just attach a little plastic hose to this and vent it out underneath the car so it doesn't go into your car. But the terminals still need to be inspected on both AGM and lithium, so some additional room is required regardless. Next, let's look at one of the most visible quality factors in a battery decision: cost per kilowatt hour. Here we can see that AGM is about 60% greater cost than flooded, and lithium is 5 times the cost of flooded batteries. So far we're only seeing one benefit from lithium, and that's weight. And unless this is being put in a vehicle or stored in a location where there's a weight restriction, this is a poor reason to choose one battery over another. Even then, at 5 times the cost, it's difficult to justify. But there is more to this than just what we've covered. Let's look at point 7 from Battleborn's literature. Lasts 10 times longer than lead acid. Surely this makes up for it, right? To do that, we need to define what battery life is, and that depends on where and how you use it. In an RV with relatively heavy use, it may be off-grid for 50 days a year. Each day you might cycle the battery to 80% depth of discharge, or down to 20% remaining, or maybe you cycle it down to 40%, 60% remaining twice a day using a generator. The result's nearly the same. And here we need to dispel one common myth about lead-acid batteries, and that's that they shouldn't be discharged past 50%. This is outright false. The damage that occurs to a lead-acid battery is cumulative, and it matters very little whether one cycles down to 20% state of charge, uses 80% of the battery, or does 2 cycles down to 60% state of charge, uses 40% of the battery. The damage is about the same. Simply speaking, the battery has a memory, and the total amount of energy put into the battery and taken out is summed up, and that sum is the amount of wear or damage that the battery sees. Here is a typical cycle life chart for a high-quality solar AGM battery. This happens to be from Trojan. Here we can see that when cycled by 20% state of charge, the cycle life is 4,500 cycles. At double that, 40%, the cycle life is about 2,300, or about 1/2. Likewise, if you use 80% of the battery down to 20% state of charge, the cycle life is 1,000. And if you use half of that, the cycle life is 2,300. Again, the effect is about linear. There is a non-zero acceleration factor, especially at deeper discharges, but for most applications it can be safely approximated that there is no limit to depth of discharge in a lead-acid battery regarding cycle life. For practical reasons, we'll later see that about 80% depth of discharge is a reasonable usable limit for lead-acid, but not in terms of cycle life. Note this chart if you live in cold climates and the batteries are exposed to the elements such as in an RV. In that case, you might want to stay above 50% state of charge, only to prevent the batteries from freezing down to temperatures of about -20°C or -5 Fahrenheit. Lead-acid batteries do freeze. AGM batteries can handle it better, but you still don't want to intentionally freeze them. Lithium batteries are a little different when it comes to cycle life. Cycling through the top 20% and bottom 20% of the capacity is extremely damaging to the cells and should be avoided. Depending on the battery management system, the BMS of your lithium battery, it may or may not allow the battery to discharge through that bottom 20% of its range, but it's best not to let the BMS cut the battery off due to low voltage, or you do risk drastically affecting your battery life. Likewise, on the top end, the BMS may not allow you to charge the cells to that higher voltage, Even so, it's best to set your charge voltage low enough so that you avoid that. To greatly prolong your lithium battery life, it's best to set the charge float voltage to slightly below what the manufacturer recommends. And in this analysis, we're going to assume that the bottom 20% of the battery is not being used and that the top 20% is not being used. We'll also assume that the top 20% is not included in the battery spec. When it comes to cycling in between those two depth of discharge ranges, we're back to the same situation as lead acid. Depth of discharge is irrelevant, and it's only the sum of the total amount of energy put in and taken out of the battery that matters regarding cycle life. Discharge depth can be ignored no matter which battery type you're talking. One additional thing to note is that lead acid batteries are usually spec'd to be end of life when capacity reaches 80% of new. Lithium is generally spec'd at 70%. The difference is because once lead acid batteries reach about 80% of their performance drops off very quickly and random failures begin to occur, so you usually want to replace them before you get random failures. Lithium batteries have a less abrupt knee in their aging and in their failure rate plots. For example, in your automobile, you may notice that your battery frequently works perfectly fine until it fails outright. That's because you didn't check it and didn't see when it reached that 80% level, maybe got to 70, 60, 50% of its performance, and then all of a sudden it failed. If you had replaced it earlier, you probably wouldn't have those random failures. With that out of the way, let's define battery life as being stored at 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, cycled once per day, and cycled every day 365 days per year. What is our battery life at various depths of discharge in this scenario? Perhaps we want to run our system to fully charge our battery every day on a generator, or perhaps we want to be able to power through a few days of clouds so that the next string of sunny days will let us recover. In the first case, we may size the batteries to be 50% depth of discharge every day, which allows for those times when we use a little bit more power than expected. In the second case, we may size it for 20% depth of discharge so that we don't have to fire up the generator when it's cloudy for a few days in a row. So let's start with the flooded battery, and let's start with 30% depth of discharge per day, where we use 30% of our battery capacity every single day. Here on the data sheet, we see that it's rated for a 17-year life in partial state of charge applications, according to IEC 61427. 17 years, once per day, is 6,200 cycles. Looking at the cycle life chart, we see that 6,200 cycles can be achieved at that depth of discharge. We choose the lesser of the years or cycle life, assuming one per day, and here we see that this battery will last 17 years in that application if maintained properly. Next, let's look at the North Star battery. This one uses a slightly different standard, it's a European standard, but it also has a partial state of charge life of 12 plus years. Now let's look at cycle life of this battery. Here we see that about 4,500 cycles can be achieved, which is enough for 12 years at one cycle per day. This battery will last 12 years if maintained properly. Now for the lithium battery. The Battleborn battery is guaranteed for 8 years, after which they offer to attempt to repair the battery if you pay shipping costs, or a 30% discount on replacement purchases if they deem it non-repairable, after you've already paid for shipping, until year 10. I will credit them with having a 10-year guarantee. After all, most lead-acid batteries have a prorated warranty as well. Cycle life is specified to be 3,000 cycles minimum. While they don't specify depth of discharge, Trojan Trillium is spec'd at 5,000 cycles to 80% depth of discharge, and many other lesser batteries are spec'd to 1,000 or 2,000 cycles at that 80% or 100%. So I'm going to assume 3,000 cycles at 80% for Battleborn. Assuming your float voltage is set slightly below what's recommended by Battleborn, this means that 10 years should be achievable. And when I say float voltage, I recognize that lithium batteries don't require a float, but in reality, generally, you have a float voltage. Thus far, we see that lithium seems to be getting crushed by the competition. It costs more per unit capacity, it takes up the same amount of space, it doesn't last as long as lead-acid options. The only advantage that we've identified is still weight. Later on, we'll talk about some practical aspects of the technologies where lithium does have some significant benefits, But in the meantime, let's see if lithium can redeem itself as we continue this analysis. If we run the same exercise at 50% depth of discharge every day, 365 days per year, which is extremely aggressive and few applications achieve or require this, remember this is every single day, 50%, then the results change a little and lithium and flooded are about on par in terms of life. AGM starts lagging behind. Still, per dollar spent, it still doesn't win. Flooded lead acid gets 10 years, AGM 6, and lithium still gets 10. At the very extreme, 80% depth of discharge every day, which is entirely impractical for any real-world application, now we see lithium start to look much better. Still, this isn't useful since a system designed to be discharged to 20% state of charge every single day is a poor design, except in special cases, which certainly do exist. RVs, perhaps, where room is very limited. Here we would get 5.5 years out of a flooded battery, 3 out of our AGM, and 8 out of our lithium. Finally, let's look at float life. Most of the time you want the batteries to be completely charged whenever possible so that the maximum amount of energy is available when you need it. Lead acid batteries are happy charged to 100% and indeed last their longest when stored fully charged. While the datasheets don't specify float life with no cycling, we can safely assume that the flooded battery will last 20 plus years in AGM 15 plus. Lithium, on the other hand, is damaged quickest when stored at full charge and prefers to be stored close to 50% charge and recharged only immediately before use. This isn't practical in renewable energy applications for obvious reasons, and they're kept at nearly full charge whenever possible. This is why I recommend backing off the charge voltage from what the manufacturer recommends, as it will significantly increase the float life and allow the cycle life to dominate where lithium batteries shine. For float life or backup power applications where it's stored charged 24/7 but not cycled, I'll assume the lithium battery will achieve its 10-year life. Again, it is the laggard of the three. Now let's talk about the most important battery metric for any battery bank in a renewable energy application, and the primary metric you should be attempting to optimize, which is cost per total kilowatt hour provided by the batteries over the life of the battery bank. For example, if the battery can store 3 kilowatt hours of energy when fully charged, and it's cycled down to 30% depth of discharge 1,000 times before end of life, that is 3 kilowatt hours times 0.3, because you're using 30% of the battery's capacity, times 1,000 cycles, equals 900 kilowatt hours of useful work over the battery's life. If that battery costs $450, then it would be able to do 2 kilowatt hours of useful work per dollar spent. If this isn't immediately clear, you can rewind the video or pause and think about it a little bit, but once you understand it, this is obvious, and it is the parameter that is the most important thing. External things to the battery not considered. I went through the 3 batteries and the 3 depth of discharge scenarios cycled once per day, 365 days per year every year, and got the results. You can see them here. Again, the 80% number is just there to throw the lithium battery a bone because it isn't useful, but the numbers are clear. Flooded lead acid wins, with AGM a clear second, and lithium lags behind. The 30% number is probably the most useful number for most applications, and here we see 11.4 kilowatt hours per dollar for flooded, 4.9 for AGM, and only 1.4 for lithium. This means that the lead acid batteries are significantly less expensive per amount of work that they do over their entire life. You don't save money by going to a lithium battery, at least not from these numbers. We'll do a more detailed analysis later and see if that changes.